So, Dan to Dan, Episode 7. And here I thought the rule was you chose Episode 5 or 8 for your mid-season standalone standout. Dan to Dan just doing things their own way again. Humanizing a character heretofore presented as a villain is a high-risk, high-reward proposition for a storyteller. If we think logically, we know that bad guys had reasons for their behavior that made sense to them, and we know that a traumatic enough event can bend a normal life path into a jagged one. Certainly with hauntings, there exists an expectation that some awful event precipitated the state. But even as much as we suspend our disbelief in the experience of a story, some background part of us knows that a storyteller is in control, and has intentionally given us a limited perspective on a character. In other words, we know we have been set up, and this is certainly not the first time we've encountered the backdoor origin story, so you are fighting against the audience's cynical experience. It's high risk, but high reward, as there are many stories whose standout moments are the redemption or recontextualization of characters that we had previously rooted against. Sometimes when we're tricked, we're glad for it. Dan to Dan has one additional hurdle, though, which is tone. While every scene has a tone, the patterns of those tones as the story progresses creates an expectation in the audience. A few jokes don't make something a comedy, but if the majority of scenes are tonally comedic, you are certainly not in a drama. What's more, a good work contains a mixture, as the more seldom used tones can serve as counterpoint to the prevailing ones, making them seem stronger by contrast. It's similar to a roller coaster, where we don't actually feel speed, we feel acceleration. We feel the banks and loops, the changes. But likewise, if there's too much acceleration or too sharp of a turn, we black out. If a story veers too far too fast from where it was going, we are no longer on the ride. Dan to Dan has largely been frenetic and irreverent. That is its prevailing pattern, and what we would expect most from any random scene drawn out of a hat. But of course, it's not every scene. It has certainly leveraged tonal delta between scenes to good effect, such as when cutting from Momo and Okarun's heartfelt makeup session straight into Momo laughing at his continued misfortune. Or, in the opposite direction, having the defeat of the Turbo Granny Crab fusion shift into the reveal of the victimized girls comprising the location-bound spirit. That itself was kind of a redeeming the villain sequence, but it works there due to its rapidity. It's already happened by the time we could have braced ourselves to be skeptical. Easier to do it that way, short and sharp amid a field of crazy scenes and a premise that itself seems like a kind of joke. Like, remember where we were at the end of last episode. A two-faced girl gets bonked by a golden ball that's actually a stolen testicle and decides to perform an exorcism on a classmate in the belief that said testicle was a heavenly calling, when it's actually just the carelessness of something called Turbo Granny, which is currently trapped in a cat statue. Exactly how seriously are we supposed to take a story with that as its setup? So while the montages showing the origin of acrobatic Silky are going to be the part of this episode that people remember most distinctly, I wanted first to emphasize that the audience must be stepped into it carefully. If that exact sequence runs at the beginning of this episode, it doesn't work as well. In fact, our adaptation leverages its medium to help the transition. The episode break itself puts some distance between Ira's antics and this week's story, and the episode opens with a short bit that foreshadows the backstory. We more readily accept that kind of non sequitur at the beginning or end of episodes, and it builds off of the brief flashback scene from before of Ira interacting with Silky in the past. We are primed to expect some explanation. And then, once Silky is seemingly defeated, we discover that Ira is not unconscious like we probably assumed, but dead. In fact, was dead all along. And that reveal is immediately followed by the opening credits, itself a tonal whiplash that almost makes the announcement into black humor. Either way, though, we have 90 seconds to sit with the idea of her death and wonder how that goes. Thus, on resumption, we have had what is basically a tonal palette cleanse. And the fact that she is really dead now sets the stage for a more serious and desperate mood to take over. The work to characterize our cast thus far now pays off. For as exaggerated as their antics can be, we've had plenty of sober and authentic moments alongside. This is not suddenly the first time they've been serious. However, This time, the enemy isn't something supernatural, but the most mundane and natural thing of all: simple mortality. That contrast is frightening in itself. Momo has been pretty good under pressure to this point, and does immediately take charge, but there is a kind of hysterical edge to it. I love the choice of keeping her still handcuffed, as it adds to that sense of helplessness. She is a little more desperate than usual, and so we shift into treating the situation as that much more dire. Okaru is characterized as painfully shy and uncertain, struggling even to look at Momo after realizing that she's cute. Performing the breathing part of CPR on Aira should be several bridges too far, but he does so. It's not a setup for a joke, and thus we know the time for jokes is long past. And throughout, Turbo Granny relays the hard facts, with a voice that, for a change, isn't quite so mocking or caustic, just matter of fact. Even when Silky gets back up, Momo's reaction is one more of annoyance or defiance. No time for the otherworldly threat right now, something more serious is going on. The shocking violence of ripping her jaw as an olive branch diffuses any worry over changing gears, and Turbo Granny's authority on spiritual matters allows the aura connection to proceed. Even if tense and skeptical, they are willing to try any lifeline. And if we are hoping for a reprieve ourselves, it's perhaps more for the sake of Momo and Okarun than it is for Aira. She isn't exactly a beloved character at this point, and so we need to see their desperation to likewise be invested in their goals. They are the ones we are rooting for. And thus, has the audience been ushered to the right mental space to witness Silky's story. After watching the episode, I wandered over to our Discord to catch up on the conversation there, and part of it was about what I've already said, that the villain redemption thing happens a lot and it doesn't always land. The prevailing sentiment, though, was that this one did. But why? And in trying to quickly attach a word to the experience, the one I hit upon was sacred. It felt sacred. And I mean that two ways. One is that it is treated seriously by the work itself, with reverence in contrast to all of the irreverent moments that have come before. The scene has gravity, but it gets there through the careful mood shaping that leads into it, the things that we have already discussed. The other way I mean it is that the story itself is two stories, the one within the apartment and the one without, the sacred inner world separated from the profane outer. The series plays with light and color, as I've said before, and Silky is pink-themed. As she's a dancer, maybe we think of the soft pink of a ballet slipper, but our actual first image is the pink lights of a love hotel, with a timer and stack of bills to supply the reality. From there, it's a trudge through darkness and rain, and we first get a look at her face in reflection on the window that separates her from a recognizable dress, another pink, a goal and a barrier between them. She comes to her apartment, back into darkness, and pauses a while before entering. And maybe because of that, we expect that some other misfortune awaits. But instead, the door opens and warmth spills out, both light and love. She has a daughter, and this apartment is a sanctuary. After hugging and greeting, she goes inside, shutting the door and the rest of the world behind, and the ballet begins. I am not going to assume you know much about ballet, though you probably recognize a ballerina's look and dancing style. An actual ballet is something like a play. It's a story, but there are no lines of dialogue, only the dancer's steps and the score that accompanies them. Ballet is about exalting the human form and movement, and so paring it down to only this and music creates emphasis, something beautiful and dreamlike in its simplicity. Thus, too, this segment, which has no dialogue, only movement against music, and we must discern the story for ourselves. And, as I said, two stories. The outer, where she works multiple jobs and takes calls to make ends meet, and the inner, where she and her daughter are the whole world, a warm, bright cube of peace, in inviolable space. Out there, a timer marks the slices of her life she sells to Johns, but in here, a timer means a meal shared between parent and child, and in the midst, a decision. Money taken from an envelope, a circled date, and the gift of the dress. Then, like a ballerina itself, the camera spins through the moments of the last day, into a night that is not dark with storm, but resplendent with stars. Of course, we know some misfortune is lurking, and it is painful yet appropriate that it should happen within the sanctuary of the apartment. Dialogue returns, beginning with the child's anguished cries. The sacred space is defiled. The outer world intrudes on the inner, the the dream shattered as surely as the glass which lacerates her skin. And after her child is taken, a second ballet, but something dark and desperate instead, cold blue rather than warm yellow, but maybe still beautiful, still dreamlike, until she dances off the edge and enters death mired in regret. At this point, we learn her connection to Ira, the teased bit from the previous episode. Perhaps her latent spiritual powers allowed her to see into the other realm and make this brief connection, and Silky replaces memories of her daughter with Ira instead. And maybe unexpectedly, we learn Ira lost her own mother, and perhaps that is also why she can briefly see Silky. In fact, it may be that both their trajectories were set around this time. As we learn, Ira was encouraged to become someone her mother could be proud of, someone strong enough to do it all on her own, and the result is the self-important girl that we have met so far. This, then, is the actual brilliance of the episode. We are redeeming acrobatic Silky, sure, but we are really redeeming Ira. It seems she and Momo both experienced the tragic story, and the surrender of her aura means Silky will end as something more tragic still, believing that she only brought harm to her daughter, that her life was unfortunate for being born to Silky. And hearing her fate, reduced to a void, forgotten by all, Ira plays the role of daughter for her. It's frightening and risky, and all a misunderstanding anyway, a stranger's twisted ghost. But she is touched, and gives what comfort she can, hoping earnestly that Silky be taken to some kinder world than this. And you see, we aren't on guard for an Ira redemption. It slips past our defenses, already in motion as we realize the possibility of halting Silky's fate. The image of Ira tear-streaked in an act of authentic kindness is a stronger one than that of a petty mean girl. The new supplants the old. We have been tricked, and are glad for it.